You are listening to the Mary Jane Society podcast, where you will meet entrepreneurs, cultivators, scientists, doctors, and inventors in the cannabis industry.
I'm your host, Pam Schmiel. Today I'm joined by Dr. Duncan Mackie, Director of Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics at Bud & Mary's, an MSO with operations in Colorado, Michigan, Iowa, and Missouri. Under Dr. Mackie's leadership, Bud & Mary's became the first cannabis company and multi-state operator to obtain a DEA research license, marking a major milestone for the industry. With a PhD in pharmacology and deep expertise in drug discovery, molecular biology, and G-protein coupled receptor pharmacology, Dr. Mackie is advancing our understanding of cannabinoids and their interaction with the endocannabinoid system. His work is helping to identify novel drug targets and explore the therapeutic potential of cannabis for a range of medical conditions. Bud & Mary's also applies this scientific insight to their product formulations, integrating cutting-edge research into what's available on their dispensary shelves. In our conversation, we explore their approach to product development, the regulatory hurdles they face, and their long-term vision. Please welcome Dr. Duncan Mackie.
You could just give us an overview of Bud & Mary's. I know you're in 4 different states. I know you're in Iowa, Michigan, Colorado, and Missouri. And
Right.
obviously in Iowa, you must just be medical only. I wasn't sure if you're medical in the other states or you have both presence there. If you could just...
So Bud & Mary's is third generation, family owned. We've been around about 7 years now. I've currently been with the company about 6, coming up on 6. We are a research-focused, multi-state operator that not only caters to obviously the recreational markets, but really driven by our research product, our research projects. And so we don't put products onto the market that we just want to sell. We want to put something onto the market that actually has a medical benefit.
So you're really starting with the company and growing it and the
Correct.
direction.
The idea of Kimmin, or the idea of Bud & Mary's came about in 2016. All the licensing, paperwork, inspections, build out, all of that stuff happened through 2016 and into 2017. First plants went into the soil mid 2017. It takes a few months to grow them and extract them and produce the product. First products were launched Q1 2018, and I was hired actually in 2019. So right around the same time our first products were hitting the market. Our first products were actually woman fit focused. We realized that there was actually a need for being able to cater to women and what they might actually want. So we actually launched with a product called Become, which is actually now part of our batch line. I think it was ahead of its time. It used minor cannabinoids. But this was 6-7 years ago, right? Nobody was really doing minor cannabinoids. The market had no clue what we were doing. So I think we were just way ahead of where we needed to be. That's probably my fault and my director of formulation at the time. I think it's probably our fault because we're digging through the literature and we're looking at it and going, oh yeah, if we use this minor cannabinoid, we can get this effect. But there was a disconnect with the consumer base, and it's caught up. Right. But
yeah, I know it's catching up to the regular market because even in the industry, we're just ahead, even in taste preferences and, who's shopping in the dispensaries and those of us who partake in it and things like that. Yeah. But also, I feel like even if you were ahead of it, that if it works, the consumer doesn't really care, if it's a minor.
Yeah.
They just don't know yet. But
yes.
Right, as long as it works.
We do a lot of that. I do a lot of outreach, a lot of talking to people, trying to educate folks that there's a lot to the plant more than one molecule, right? THC is a single molecule. But really, in honesty, there's, any cultivar has anywhere around 500 medically relevant compounds. I went to a talk last year at the Cannabis Research Conference where somebody gave a tour de force about his research. He's actually an older gentleman from Israel who had been doing cannabis research for like 40 years, and through his lab he had seen over 2,000 different compounds just throughout his entire career, right? And so THC is the reason it's Schedule 1, but it's one compound, right? And so the medical value of the plant, it hasn't been fully realized. I don't even know if in my lifetime it will be fully realized
Right.
because we are so far behind. But I am one of those people that just happened to come along. And I tell people this story because my parents met at college here in Boulder in the late 60s, early 70s. So they're traditionally Boulder hippies.
Yeah.
And so, and it was never viewed as this illicit substance, this dangerous substance. It was often said, well, when you're an adult, you can figure out if you want to consume it, but it's not bad nor good. It has medical value to it, and then my parents let me make that decision. So they were really supportive. Like I come along, I have a PhD in medicinal natural products chemistry. There's this company here in Colorado that's looking at doing actual research around the plant. At the time, my former roommate from college at the University of Iowa was our director of chemistry and extraction. So he kind of brought me up on a weed holiday. And I hadn't consumed in probably 5 or 6 years. I was running a lab and doing research and writing my K-99, my grant to become a faculty member at the University of North Carolina, and just doing that academic route when the opportunity presented itself. So I just come along at this right time, right place, right level of education,
Right, right, right.
right view of the plant, reverence of the plant, all coalescing at the same time into this role that I've taken on here at Bud and Mary's. So it's one of these serendipitous, right? Like who
Yeah.
knows how it happens, right?
Yeah, no, I see how it happened. Like
Yeah.
you said, it really that's really great. I actually just want to kind of go back to the women's formulations again, because now I've been hearing a lot of people talking about, there just seems to be a lot of people talking and different people that I'm talking to about women's issues and looking for, cannabis related formulations to help in these certain issues. I'm hearing it more and more, and
Oh, yeah.
yeah, really. So what were you addressing, and what issues were you addressing, and what cannabinoids were working?
Oh yeah, we were very early on the CBN. We were very early on in the CBD. We were making 1-to-1 carts 7 years ago when most people were still making high THC carts. From a brand standpoint, a marketing standpoint, our entire line was much more soft, I guess you could call it, more floral packaging. Our marketing points were very different than what the market was currently offering. Our talk tracks, which I actually work with our sales reps on a lot on how to convey science to a purchasing manager, right? So I do spend a lot of time working on talk tracks with sales reps. And so we had a very different approach on even our talk tracks, right? When you go into a dispensary, how are we going to market this product to a woman for whatever her needs are, right? Whether it was a sleep issue, whether it was a menopausal issue, whatever we were targeting at the time. Surprise, surprise, we found out guys also like minor cannabinoids and want to sleep. We also found women like high THC carts.
Oh,
So,
okay.
so,
Okay.
so while we did that, we then launched Signature. The next one was Signature, which is our sativa, indica, and hybrid, strain matched carts. And we found that people, regardless of their gender, were either looking for some kind of relief or some kind of recreational. And so we still have both products, and they've been around the entire time. But we've kind of come to a more maybe unisex packaging, a more cohesive talk track from a marketing standpoint. Yeah, so those are kind of the lessons learned, right?
Right, right. And like, so have you looked into formulations that would treat, I've heard a lot of people talking about like menopausal issues. That's like one of the ones that comes up. And because the endocannabinoid system is in the female part of
Well,
it.
it interacts with the endocrine system and
And
the woman's reproductive system.
yeah,
which are
Yeah.
different. So men's sex hormones are really localized to like the testes, the reproductive organs. Whereas women, it's a systemic organ, right? And so that's always been one of the things about, and I talked and you had quoted me on the Ambien thing, right? Like hormones confound your results. When you're doing a mouse or a clinical trial in humans, hormones in women are cycled throughout the entire body, right? And so traditionally, you just didn't test it in women, which just baffled me when I was a graduate student. It was like, why? That doesn't make
Yeah.
any sense. 50% of the world is women,
Right.
And so I always found it very just like, why is it that way? And when it was explained to me that hormones, they'll confound your results, it became more of like, well, that's not a valid answer. Like, that's not a real rational answer. Like, we just exclude this because we don't like the results. It's like, no, you have to figure out how it interacts with those hormones, right? Like, that's the side effect, right? Might come from that. And so a lot of what we did early on was that focus. And then probably 3 years ago, 4 years ago, we pivoted and really started working and came laser focused on the brain, right? And the neuro degenerative diseases. And that was a little bit of a business model because we were everywhere. We were doing women's health, we were doing brain, we were doing gastrointestinal tract, we were doing diabetes, and I think that cannabinoids have a role, and the endocannabinoid system has a role in all these. But from a company standpoint, if you're doing everything, you're not really doing anything, right? And so we had to become focused, right? And really focus in on where do we think we can make the biggest impact on a patient's life, right? And that's where we said, well, we know the brain, we know that there's some precedence in the brain with CBD and endocannabinoids. When you really dig into the literature, you start to see CB1 and CB2 receptors popping up into these diseases. And so it became a really easy, let's focus on that, right? And so we do have other thoughts, and I've had kicked around thoughts, and I think there's roles for lots of different diseases. But from a company standpoint, it was made as a business decision to some extent that we should focus on Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington's disease. I've written grants for traumatic brain injuries. I've done CTE with the NFL, working with collaborators out of Temple. So anything in the brain, right? And that's where we
Yeah.
really and I wasn't a brain person. I did lung and prostate cancer. I've done cardiovascular and lymphatic vascular development. I've done women's reproductive health, but I haven't ever done anything in the brain. So it became one of these where I got to learn a whole new system, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
So I also read that, I guess this is part of your research, that you're mapping, I don't know if I have it right, but that you're creating a map of what cannabinoids react on which receptors.
Yep. So we have, there's multiple funding routes. One of our projects funded through the Institute of Cannabis Research here at Colorado State University in Pueblo. It's also overseen by the governor's office and funded through the state of Colorado. They actually, we have several grants with them, but one of them is looking at developing biosensors. And so I did a lot of pharmacology and biosensor work when I was an academic. And it's one of these most basic principles, but it's something that's lacking within the cannabinoid family, right? Like, what do individual isolates do? And then what do they do when they're in, a 20-to-1 tincture, right? Like,
Yeah.
what receptors are you hitting? What does the signaling look like? Because if we can really tease that apart, and again, 500 compounds from one plant, now you're really getting complex, right? What does a
Yeah.
full spectrum extract do at this receptor or that receptor? Cannabinoid receptors. We're also looking at some of the orphans, GPR55. There's TRPV1, so the TRP channels are another one that we know cannabinoids interact with. But there's these things where we kind of had like pieces to the puzzle, but we've never been able to actually put the puzzle together, right? And understanding at the most basic level, cellular signaling level. And this is something that's a lack, because if you think about beta blockers as an example with the beta receptors, We know the signaling like really well. We know
Oh,
they do really well, right? And that's just one example. We know what opioid receptors do really well.
is
Um,
that heart? Is the
yeah,
beta?
that's in your heart. That's a cardiovascular. And you've heard of like beta blockers, right?
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yeah. Okay.
everybody's heard of beta blockers, and it's because
Right.
we
That's where we're
know.
studying that.
Yeah,
Right.
right. We know it. We study it. We've allowed companies to study it. We've allowed academics to study it. We are now finally allowed to study some cannabinoid. Well, we are, and that's one of the beauties of the DEA license that we carry. As a private institution, as a company, as far as I know, I think we're the only one, and I haven't come across any companies that have a DEA Schedule 1 license to study cannabinoids. There's academics. Ella Soli's lab in Mississippi. There's institutes. So Sue Sicily at the Institute of Cannabis, at Field to Healed out in Scottsdale Research Institute. So you have these institutes and these academics, but as a company, I haven't come across one, and I can't say there isn't one other than us.
Yeah.
um, but it's a small group of people, so I think I kind of know everybody.
Yeah, no,
Um,
yes, that's what I've been looking for is somebody in the United States who's been doing this and getting us going forward.
yep.
So as far as the signaling and the mapping and everything that you're finding, what are you finding related to these neurological diseases that you're really studying right now? What is there anything you can tell us about what you're finding?
So we have a patented brain health formula that we are actually currently working on investigational new drug application, which will go in with the FDA. And that's the first step to getting it into individuals, right? And really, we're kind of laying the groundwork for that by going after sleep. So our first one is obviously a sleep clinical trial with the University of Iowa. That IND is currently with the FDA being evaluated. That's a small pilot study, but somebody's got to take that first step, right? And I'll keep going until all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, because I think that there's so much value in the plant that I'm willing to die on that hill. I'm willing to put in the hard work. We constantly come up against roadblocks. We constantly come up against issues with regulators, oversight, whatever it is. I'm well equipped to deal with those roadblocks and figure out how to get through them, right? And so when it comes to circle back to your point, we're laying the foundation with a patented sleep gel, oral gel that we have. Once we get that through, my idea is I really want to then say, look, that was really good. There's some benefit there. Here's the real positive. I have a feeling we're going to have really positive clinical data. Anybody who's taking cannabis or a CBN or a product that to help them sleep, it's anecdotal. Right. But what we want is the data, the hard data to say, look, it helps. Like it's good, right? It's a
Yeah.
medicine. And then the other idea is that we have a patented brain health formula. The first steps there is obviously putting it into a healthy person, making sure there's no side effects, which again, millions of people consume cannabis around the country every day with minimal side effects. The other components are actually natural extracts that come from our parent company, Kimmin Industries. And so Kimmin has a new Mintex. They have a spearmint extract. They have some of these extracts that are natural extracts that have been shown to aid in a positive brain health state, right? And that's really what we're trying to do. I like to describe neurodegenerative diseases as very complex, and most people would say, yeah, the brain's pretty complex, but the diseases themselves are complex, and I don't think we'll ever get to this magic bullet, right? And so I always like to tell people the step one is stop digging, right? And so we have ways to clear disease-causing proteins. We have ways to stop the insult, the chronic insult that occurs over 30 years. But during that 30 years, you've had massive neuroinflammation, chronic neuroinflammation occurring. Cannabinoids are very potent anti-inflammatory compounds. So our formula actually leverages that aspect, and it allows us to actually nourish the brain into a healthy brain state, right? And so I don't know if we'll ever turn back the clock, but first you got to stop digging. And then second, you got to figure out how to kind of fill back in the hole, right? Like if you're in a hole, stop digging. And
Yeah.
I don't think you ever get the land back to the original way. But if we can improve somebody's quality of life for several years, that's a benefit, right? Like thinking about the patients, thinking about the families, thinking about, and this is how I think, thinking about those people who are actually affected with these diseases, and keeping them at the center. Most of the one treatment that's out there for Alzheimer's, it doesn't buy more than a couple months of, quality of life standard. But if we can actually get somebody several years of quality of life with our brain health formula, that's what we're going to do, right? Like that's what matters to me as a researcher and as somebody who, has older parents, who are in their 70s. It's something that worries me, right? And so that's our main focus in our research program right now.
Right. So I guess it's similar to like a beta blocker. It's just kind of holding off or cancer treatment, an immunotherapy or something that's holding it off or,
Yep, yep, yep.
some
Well, and to be honest with you, we see some brain growth back, some neuron regeneration. These are things we're going to obviously monitor during our studies. And I can tell you right now, when you switch it into a healthy brain state, you actually get neurotropins and you get these positive signaling molecules that are found during early adolescence and early brain development, right? And so we might be able to not turn back 40, 30 years. But if you can at least turn it back a little bit and then stop it, right? Like that's the other thing, is just stop it from progressing. That's a win, right? Like that, especially since there's nothing on the market that does anything at this point.
Yeah, no, no. Yeah, and then as far as Parkinson's, my mother has Parkinson's, so I understand it. That's like the brain talking to your hand, lift up your hand. It's
Yep.
your motor skills, I guess
Yeah. So the front of the brain is Alzheimer's, frontotemporal.
Okay.
There's about 300 dementias that actually arise from the front part of the brain. Everybody knows Alzheimer's, but it's actually a much larger umbrella, right? And then in the center of the brain is the motor center, and that's actually where Parkinson's occurs. So the different parts of the brains are affected, get you these different named diseases. And we do both, right? So we actually model Parkinson's using alpha-synuclein, using tau, using disease-causing proteins. We model our Alzheimer's using amyloid beta and tau. Tauopathies are kind of starting to be recognized as in all of these things. But it's these disease-causing proteins are really our focus, and they lead to the just chronic inflammation. And I think if you can treat that part, you could have something that treats multiple diseases, right? Because it's an underlying cause across all of them. Same thing with a traumatic brain injury. If you get a concussion, there's a massive inflammation spike that occurs, a cytokine storm, as I've heard people call it. And so if you can blunt that massive, response, long-term prognosis is going to be better, right? And so that's the way we think about patients, right? And again, I keep coming back to the patients because that's really why this thing exists, right? That's why my job exists, is because I keep the patients at the center of what I do. And it's kind of my guiding light, right? Like, it's like when things get hard, you think about, this is hard in the lab, but how much harder is it for a patient or family member who's suffering from Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, right? And it really gives you the motivation to keep going.
Yeah, it's really bad. So many people are, experiencing that. So in your research so far, are you finding, like, have you gotten to the point yet where you are seeing cannabinoids that work? And I always wonder, like you were saying earlier, like what milligram dose, what ratios, how much do you have to take?
Yeah,
Those
yeah.
are questions really, but I'm wondering where you are. I'm curious about what cannabinoids are effective, or are there multiple, or
Yeah. So ours is a specific formula containing multiple cannabinoids, and I think that's where we don't have to dose with such a high dose. Like I read a clinical trial where they were putting hundreds of milligrams of CBN because it's by itself, it's an isolate, and it's like if you you wouldn't need to use hundreds of milligrams to get that effect if you were using combinations of cannabinoids, right? Because we know they interact. We know they don't just, not 1+1 = 2. It's more like 1+1 = 10 because they synergize and potentiate each other, right? And so they amplify each other's effects. We call it the entourage effect, but the modulation of each other is key. So we find we get therapeutic doses at much lower amounts. We use, as an example on our sleep stuff, we're using 20 milligrams of CBD and 4 and 4 of CBN and THC as an example. And it's a common ratio you see out there, but like you don't have to give a psychoactive amount of THC. You just need enough there to aid the CBN and the CBD to do their job, right?
Yes.
It's all about the receptor modulation. And I think there's a role for THC, but I don't think you have to hit with super high amounts to get what you need out of the system. The plan exists obviously as a full spectrum, and we do work on that too. When we set up our cellular models or whatever we're investigating, we'll throw different combinations, different full spectrums, just to see what happens, right? Because it's like I can put isolates on stuff, and I get a response. But if I throw a full spectrum extract onto it, that response is much more robust in our biosensor experiments, as an example. And so I prefer to work with full spectrums. The problem there is the FDA and DEA, well, especially FDA. They don't really. They're coming around to the idea of polypharmacology, but that's what this plan is, right? It's not a single drug, single target, right? It's multiple receptors, it's multiple combinations within a full spectrum extract, and that's where you're going to get the most robust response. And I like to use, again, Chinese medicine as an example, because sometimes we take the Chinese medicine that works, we break it down into its individual pieces, and it doesn't work all of a sudden. And we're like, well, why is it not working? And it's, well, because you're using the isolates, but you need everything, right?
Okay. So, yeah, okay, so that then lands us on the FDA,
Yep.
which everybody, would love to know what's going on there.
Yep.
So how, okay, so I know you've said that you already got your DEA license, that now it's in the FDA's hands
Yes. Yes.
to recognize your work or to
So approve. So we're looking for FDA approval for our clinical trial. And so we wrote, quite a packet. And then I use my collaborators at the University of Iowa as a really good example because they're amazing folks. But their hospitals and clinics, their Office of Sponsored Programs, Vice President of Research Office. I mean, it takes a team, an army of people to get a submission in with the FDA. And so what ends up happening is that goes in with the FDA. It takes them about 30 days but to do a thorough review, right? And that's because they bring in a medical doctor, a pharmacologist, they bring in nurses, they bring in everybody you can imagine, for obviously product safety, consumer safety. And then they will actually issue us a report on what they determined, right? It can go one of like 3 ways. Effectively, it's, yes, this looks great, you're good, just go. What's most common is they come back with comments, you fix it, you address their concerns, and then you resubmit and then it approves. Or there's the no way you're ever going to put this into a person kind of answer. That's also much more rare. Lion's share of it generally it's a back and forth, right? And I like, for me, I have no problems with any regulator at any level, because I know they have a difficult job, right? They're evaluating something, and we're trying to come up with something that's unique, something that's never been done before. And so when you're actually talking to someone, and you're proposing a Schedule 1 as a medical treatment, I mean, they're obviously going to be extra vigilant, right? Only because of that. So again, I have high hopes, and I don't begrudge them, and I don't get my feelings hurt when somebody comes back and says, "Hey, you got to address these things." Basically, you address it and you move forward. I want to show that it works, and if it doesn't work, we're going to move on. Like, I'm not going to say, "Oh, it didn't work. Let's somehow package this and sell this in some other way." it's not how I operate, right? And so I think really important is getting something that works, something that shows an effect, something that we can say, look, this is what it's actually doing in a human. Here's the medical benefit, and then we'll go from there, right? And so then we think about bringing a product to market and along those lines. But first, I want to show that there's a clinical effect, right?
I mean, at least, at least recently, the FDA has approved cannabis and sent it over to the DEA now, like kind of approved. So that must have been a good milestone for you and what you're trying to do. At least have acknowledged it, sent it off, and now they can kind of look at things that you're doing. And then would you be the first company that would it be a nutraceutical that you're going for, or
So right now we haven't made that decision, right? Because it could go one way or the other, right? You could go nutraceutical, generally recognized as safe pathway. If it's really efficacious and it really works, we could also go pharmaceutical route. And again, that might be above my thinking. Obviously, I'm part of that discussion, but there's my ownership group, Chris Nelson, Lucas Nelson, the Nelson family. How do they view this, right? And I take their they listen to me and I listen to them and we go back and forth. It's really nice. That's part of the nice part about having a family-owned company, right? Is like I get to talk to an individual who owns the company, and they understand it. Chris Nelson's a PhD scientist himself, so he values the scientific standpoint, right? And he understands it. And so I think at the end of the day, we haven't had to make that decision at this point. But I do think it's something that obviously you have to think about, as you bring a product to market, something along those lines. But if you get really something that's really efficacious and we have the patenting behind the oral gel, we have IP around it, we could go either way effectively.
Yeah. No, either way will be great.
Mhm.
Great progress for you, for the industry.
Correct.
Science, safety, the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, and as a company, I mean, other than maybe Epidiolex, which is a CBD, obviously GW Pharma. Other than that, there's not much out there other than the synthetic Marinol. There's a few things out there, but none of them are at this level. Like those are all single compounds. This is a combination of cannabinoids. Looking at something that is a sleep not that other ones aren't, but sleep is complicated, plays a major factor in mood, plays a major factor in long-term Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. We know there's a connection between sleep and neurodegeneration. Cognition is important. It comes from sleep. And so a lot of these things are a reason why we really liked sleep as an avenue, because we think we can affect multiple things.
And why it's like one of the number one reasons people are purchasing cannabis for those reasons. So then you had mentioned earlier that the FDA doesn't like multiple cannabinoids or
just polypharmacology, right?
Polypharmacology.
Yep. Yeah.
You're not working with like a single plant, a single strain to formulate your products. You're doing all isolated.
Yep. Isolated in specific ratios. And that's been the best path forward. Other than St. John's wort, they're generally recognized as safe. They're marketed as a nutraceutical, and they don't make claims like medical claims, right? And so it's a very interesting area, and it's something I'm learning. Obviously, coming from academics, not something I knew a lot about until I came into this role. But it's an interesting way of how you can word things, making sure that you're making the right claims, that you have the data to support what you're saying, and that's where we're operating under.
Do you see the day, or have you tried to work with cultivators or your own cultivators on creating, like, let's just say Parkinson's, and you need these cannabinoids in this strain to hit these receptors or whatever. Is that possible? Like, do you see that as the future? I have talked to some other drug discovery researchers who are working with cultivators, but I don't know really enough beyond that what the problems are.
So some of our cultivation, I guess the problem with that is most of our research cannabis, we have to source from Ella Soli's lab, or we have to source it from Sue Sicily because she has a bulk manufacturing license. And so still following NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, and who has a bulk manufacturing license to provide research grade cannabis, right? And we have a license. We're still waiting to hear back from the DEA on our bulk manufacturing license. But sadly, I can't go and study the cannabis that we cultivate in our own facility under federal rules.
Oh, okay. So right, you have to even though you have a DEA license, you
Because I
can't.
have a researcher license, not a bulk manufacturing license. So they're
Oh,
they're
and
different licenses.
there's
And
two-
one we have, and one we're under consideration for.
oh, that would make a lot of sense. So,
Yeah.
so Sue Sisley does have the bulk and
Yep,
research
yep.
license?
She's the one who brought attention to the monopoly on research cannabis.
Oh, like
And as
Mississippi.
on a byproduct of not being allowed to have a monopoly, they opened up a licensing avenue for bulk manufacturing. She applied and she got the first one. And since then, there's a couple more. But we really like Sue, so we've worked with her in the past.
Do you see that as down the road that you could like really work, closely with a cultivator to
Oh
produce?
yeah. Well, the goal is obviously to get our own bulk manufacturing license. And at that point, we have under our state. So we also have a state license. And our state license actually, we helped draft that legislation probably 3 or 4 years ago. So we have a state clinical trial license. State of Colorado allowed us to put that into a mechanism for that. And under that license, we're able to actually do breeding. We're actually allowed to do plant stuff, but that plant can't feed into the federal side at this point. So unfortunately, they operate under different rules and different guidances, and state guidance versus federal guidance. And sometimes I'm thinking about state and sometimes I'm thinking about federal, and keeping track of it all is a joy. If rescheduling ever went through, if it ever went to a Schedule 3, or something that decriminalized, whatever the movement is at the federal level, I don't know if it will happen in the next couple of years. But long term, that's what we're preparing for, right? Like we look at it and say, and Lucas, I think, can speak to this, our ownership group, is that we're not in it for the short term. Everything we're doing is long term stability, long term sustainability, long term play, where we want to be around for years and decades, not come in, make money, then sell off.
Okay, just my last question about cultivation.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I know there's a lot of inconsistencies and even within the plant, and it seems very difficult to use it for, a specific reason like this. Um, but um, but you see it's possible. I guess that's the bottom line. I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah. Well, and I think new technologies are coming around all the time. I mean, CRISPR-Cas has only been around since 2012, I believe, 2013. Um, Waxy corn was just released, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. So the first plant that was ever genetically engineered using CRISPR-Cas. That's a DuPont plant that was actually released. It's called waxy corn.
oh,
So plant genetics are things that people are starting to do. At some point, it'll trickle into cannabis, I'm sure.
well, you think like, oh, you want to take the natural plant, how it evolved itself and expressed itself, and
Yeah, yeah.
things like that. But when we get down to medicine, and once you find, that you need these specific cannabinoids, whatever they are, it feels like, you have to work with a breeder or
Yep,
somebody,
yep.
or I
You
guess
either have to do traditional breeding. You could do the whole irradiate seeds and see what happens. That's what we did 100 years before we had the ways to play with the genes.
right,
People would
right.
irradiate seeds, plant them in the ground, and see what happened, right? And that was a
Yeah.
common thing from 1900 till about 1960. Only in the past maybe 30, 40 years have we actually had agrobacterium, ways to do things that we now just take for granted, right? But those are newer tech.
Yeah.
And so when you think about mouse models, I mean, mouse models of human diseases are only around since the 80s. The Nobel Prize was given to Oliver Smithies in the 80s, for mouse models of human diseases and genetic engineering. So a lot of this stuff is super new. And I think we think of like time frames are hundreds of years of human existence, and only in a very short period of time have we made these giant leaps, right? And so I think the future of cannabis is very similar to a lot of agriculture, right? Like we like to separate it out because it is a medicine, but we also, I think, forget that a lot of our medicines come from plants.
Keep our eyes on the cultivators, like the OG cultivators. People have been massaging and, talking to these plants for so long, trying all different things, different methods, seeing them in the field, smelling it. I just think they are really the future of where maybe not medical, but just where we're going to go and how it's
Mhm.
going to, we're going to get all the full benefits. But anyway, so
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
so that's
Correct, correct.
whatever. But
And so we have a really good cultivator at one of our facilities in Iowa, Joey. And so he's a farm boy, right? And so he's bringing his farm techniques, Iowa farm boy
farm boy.
into cannabis, right? And it's like they've been doing it for generations in places like Iowa and Kansas. And so while we have the OG breeders and the OG growers, agriculture has been occurring for so long, and there's techniques that people are bringing in now to cannabis that are just they're going to only improve, right?
Yeah, so I just have two last
No,
questions.
you're good.
Okay, I know that you also produce topicals, and I feel like it's not something that we're really focusing on right now. We're focusing, right, ingesting. And I'm just, how effective are they? Where are we as far as our knowledge on it, as far as, penetrating into into the skin? You've heard about specific cannabinoids for wound care or just, skin
Yep.
skincare. And because there are a lot of products out there, and I feel like I've been wanting to kind of focus on it at some point, but if you could just tell us where we
Oh
are
yeah,
with.
yeah. So ours is not a transdermal. We could formulate for transdermal. There's some techniques that you could do, patches you could do for a transdermal, microneedles. There's lots of different ways. The beauty is a lot like we think of cannabinoids as like these unique things, but in reality they're APIs, they're advanced pharmaceutical ingredients, and that's really how Bud and Mary's views them, right? So our cream, Nuo cream, for example, is formulated from a compounding pharmacy standpoint, right? And so it was invented, formulated when I first got here. I worked with our former director of formulation, who was like 35-year compounding pharmacist, as an example. And so he understood, okay, we need to microencapsulate. We need to be able to have it to penetrate to the lower level of the dermis. We want it to form a depot and release over time, but that's already been done. There's like a million steroid creams and like there's like all these creams out there. And he's like, well, I've formulated oils before. This is an oil. Let's do a pharmaceutical grade cream. So we actually purchased our cream under a pharmacy license. So our cream base is actually a compounding pharmacy cream base. So it's not like we bought Jergens or not to berate something that's
Yeah.
great I use, but our cream base is actually bought through a compounding pharmacy mechanism, and that allows us to load our advanced pharmaceutical ingredient, in this case cannabinoids, and then make sure that it's actually penetrating to the right place and doing what we want it to do. I don't know how many people think about that when they think about topicals. I don't know how many people think about compounding pharmacy and drawing inspiration from there. But as a medicinal chemist and then, working with compounding pharmacists and inventing this cream, our Nuo line, I use it. I use it on my legs. I do half Ironman and triathlon, and I am in my 40s, so I get sore.
Yeah.
And I use it for soreness and I use it for relief myself. And so I think it works great. I recommend it to people. It's
Mhm.
fat. It actually absorbs quite quickly. It doesn't leave an oily layer on your skin. I've seen that as some people's complaints. I've had sales reps tell me they use the unscented cream for migraines. I've had women tell me they use it for migraines. I have a sister who is a chronic migrainer who uses unscented for her migraines. And so anecdotally, I've had and I use it myself. So it's one of these things where I think the approach we take, which is that scientific based approach, we don't just try to reinvent the wheel. We say, well, what oil pharmaceutical ingredient is loaded into a cream. And what cream base were they? Oh, it's a compounding pharmacy cream base. Well, how do we get our hands on that cream base?
Just been very skeptical because of just everything you're saying. It can't just be the homemade concoction of whatever. There's a lot of homemade stuff out there.
Yep, yep.
CBD creams, and I'm just thinking, I don't know. Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you're verifying, really. I don't know if you know much about this, but like toxicology or issues that product developers should be thinking about in vape formulations.
Yes. I mean, obviously don't use popcorn flavor. So there's research on popcorn lung, and it
Oh,
comes
popcorn
from
lung.
people who worked in popcorn factories, right? With the fake butters and the flavorings.
Oh,
It's well
no.
known that that's something you don't want to use. There's things like cinnamaldehydes, and there's like that's what's in cinnamon candy. And if you eat a cinnamon candy, it's okay. Your liver and kidneys detoxify it. You don't have that first pass metabolism. You don't have that protection if you're inhaling a cinnamon flavored vape, as an example. So it really does take somewhat of an understanding of medicinal chemistry, an understanding of toxicology. If you're a company that's formulating a new flavor or a new product, I would hope you have somebody with that core competency. But bring somebody in, hire them, pay the money. Long term, you'll be much happier.
So what do we have to be careful of? Is it these, I guess, like the cinnamon that you can ingest but you can't inhale?
Correct, correct. And cinnamaldehyde is an aldehyde. It's going to cause issues down the road.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's often found as a flavorant.
Okay.
Things that aren't allowed in our state, something like vitamin E acetate, as an example, or ethyl acetate, they're well-known flavor ingredients in candies or like known ingredients in some of our food products, and they're not going to harm you if you eat it. A lot of times they're a flavor enhancer, but they should not be in something that's going to go over an atomizer in a vaporizing cart and go to 400 or 500 degrees, because that's about what it takes to vaporize an oil.
Right.
Understanding at that temperature what you're actually producing, what somebody's actually inhaling is super important, right? And it takes people with specific set of chemistry understanding skills, right? And again, that comes back to investing in the right people in your company, to make sure that everybody's doing things along the right way. And I don't think we need to self-regulate, but it'd be a great world if every company took that to heart.
I'm surprised people are even vaping because it's like, okay, who was the cultivator? Who extracted it? How much mold was in that cultivation? How much solvents are in there? And then you go to the vape hardware, and if it's not, heating the right way and all this kind of stuff, it just
Yeah.
seems there's so many inherent problems or problems that could happen with this vape technology and formulation that it's just kind of mind-boggling. It's just a little
I will
scary.
say part of like GMP and GAP, and the reason the core of those is that you understand the pipeline where everything came from, right? And so if somebody says they're GMP, they have an approved vendor list. They have vetted these companies that they're working with for ingredients. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes to make sure that the partners we work with, we trust and they trust us.
By these
And
GMP standards
yeah,
or
and that's all part of like why people get those standards, because that's the confidence your customer can have, is like when you put a GM, you say, yes, I've been audited, but there's a lot, there's I think I'm going through 39 pages of requirements and statutes and things that we have to document and vet other companies, and companies have to vet us, and so it's really understanding the entire pipeline, right? Like where does each component come from, what goes into that final product, so that consumer knows it's a safe product to consume, right? Anything that you consume, cannabis is not any different than a lot of these other consumer products at that level, right? You need to have those controls. You need to understand all your inputs, so that the consumer knows and can trust what they're buying is what they're buying, right?
it should be mandatory. I mean, in Europe, there's that is mandatory, for any, because they're purely medical.
Yep.
And just now you're making me realize, for the very reasons you're saying, that would almost eliminate people doing anything wrong. I mean, if you were really following that, and just keep that pipeline clean the whole way.
All the way through. And that's why when you look at Coca-Cola, and I like to use them because Coke across the world all taste the same and they control all their inputs. And so when you buy a 12-pack, you know what you're drinking.
Oh, well. And then I guess I'd just love to end on what's some of your favorite minor cannabinoids or upcoming cannabinoids that you're poking around with now, and just generally.
Right now, it's a lot of the combinations, right? Like trying to tease apart, why do we use a 20-to-1 CBD to THC tincture, right? Like you see that a lot as one example, but why are we doing that? Why are we using THC? And I've seen THC now mixed with THCV when I think they actually counteract each other a little bit. And so the benefits you'd get with THCV are going to be mitigated by having THC. So why wouldn't you just make a THCV alone, right? But understanding it at the molecular level, understanding it at the cellular level, what role does THC, CBD, and CBN play in each of the steps of, say, sleep or a concussion syndrome? We have a couple other ones that we've isolated: CBR, CBE, CBT. We're still going through and just isolating these random cannabinoids that show up in one plant one time. And so it's like, well, like, cool, we isolated it. Now we have to figure out what it does at the cellular level before we even think about a disease, right? And so we're really in the infancy. And anybody who acts like they know all of it is fooling you, because
I know
we know what CBD does.
Yeah, I know it's a long process. And do you have researchers working under you, like just looking at?
Correct. So I have a team. I have a Dr. Fowler, Dan Fowler, who is actually quite active on places like LinkedIn and social media, just trying to educate people about cannabis in general. Really great neuro guy. And then I have a Sarah Hammerstrom. She used to work on Prion disease, which is like mad cow, and diseases like that. And so I stole her from CSU. And she's another neuro person that I brought in. And then I have Tyler Savage, who just got her master's at CU Anschutz. Monday, she just walked. And so I am a faculty member there. I have a standing appointment there. And so she's one of my first graduate students to graduate from there. So that was always fun. But she's more analytical chemistry. So she does a lot of our microbial stuff, and she's been really open to learning biology. But she's an analytical chemist. She does a lot of that work. And so those three, they're awesome. But I would be remiss because it's not just those three, right? Like any good idea can come from anywhere. And so sometimes people from Iowa call me, people from Michigan call me, our facilities there, and they go, hey, we have this really cool idea. Like, can we test it? What do you think about this? And so I get a lot of those. And so we put it into our innovation cycle that we have, and we use just stage gates, and we bring ideas through a stage gate process, which is super common in industry. But we use that same process, and really democratize, new products, ideas, efficiencies, any kind of good idea. Bring it to me. We see if it has weight.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's a wrap, unless you want to add anything that I missed asking you or anything.
No, I think there's big things coming. And I would, patience, right? And trust me, I'm not. Wait is a 4-letter word, and I learned that from my bosses when I was a student. But it is one of these things where obviously good science takes time. Good science and publishing takes time, right? Getting your ideas out there, but having them properly vetted and evaluated by people who don't have a dog in the race, that just takes time, right? Because that's just the way science works. We all want to know the answer tomorrow, and I would love to know it today. But I do think things are going to happen, right? In the next few years, we're just scratching the surface, and we're going to see some really cool advancements within our industry, and both from just recreational side, but across the board. So yeah.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Thank you.